Well, again, welcome everybody to our first fireside chat of the new year, 2023. Happy to be continuing this format through this new year. I had a great time hosting fireside chats all through last year. Covered a huge range of topics. Had some really interesting speakers come in that helped alleviate me from having to be an expert on every topic that we covered. And we're going to continue this same format through 2023. So for those of you that are new to this fireside chat, my name is Kirk Hanson. I'm the Director of Forestry for the Northwest Natural Resource Group. I'm also a small woodland owner. My family owns about 200 acres across 3 different tracts of forest land in Western Washington, and come from a tree farming family that hails from Minnesota. So it's been a family tradition of ours for a few generations now. Happy to be continuing that tradition. The Northwest Natural Resource Group is a nonprofit organization, and we specialize in ecologically based forest management and small woodlands management. And as a nonprofit, we get grants to do education, training, outreach, provide resources to small woodland owners. We also do a lot of consulting. We help folks develop forest management plans. We do ecologically based commercial timber harvesting and are basically set up to provide small woodland owners with any forest management assistance that they need. Like I mentioned, as a nonprofit, we're able to get grants to do educational events, and these fireside chats fall squarely into that. So once a month, we'll be hosting an evening discussion like this on one topic or another relating to small woodlands management. We have a lot of ideas for 2023, but we also want this to be responsive to your interests. And so if there is a particular topic or range of topics that you would like us to cover in a fireside chat, I welcome you to put that into the chat function at the bottom of your screen and let us know. And if there's enough consensus around a particular topic, either I will address that, one of our other staff members will address it, or we'll bring in a specialist like we're doing tonight to talk about our particular topic. So the topic tonight is on forest monitoring, and I'm happy to have Joey Hulbert joining us. Joey is the director of the Forest Health Network or Forest Health Program, which is embedded within WSU Extension, but is a collaborative effort amongst multiple organizations. And he'll be talking about that after I get done rattling on about some of my own ideas about forest monitoring. And so once Joey has had a chance to present the Forest Health Program that he's working on, then again, we'll open this up to a group discussion. And I'm interested in hearing again how you define forest monitoring. What kind of forest monitoring practices are you implementing on your land? And certainly then you can also ask any questions that you have of either Joey or myself. Alex Dolk again is moderating the fireside chat tonight. This is ultimately has been her brainchild. If you have questions that come up during the course of the first half hour when we're presenting, again, you can put those questions also in the chat function. And when we get done, Alex will screen those questions, and Joey or I will try to address those before we open this up to a group discussion. So with that, one thing that I think I've kind of come to enjoy personally about these fireside chats is I've started to think about them as the appropriate technology approach to small woodlands management. These have been very informal conversations about some topics that are very complex. We've talked about forest taxes, we've talked about estate planning, and sometimes they've been less complex. Last month, December, we talked about non-timber forest products. It was a great group discussion amongst everybody. What kind of other non-timber products are you harvesting from your forest? I'm going to stay true to that tradition with this topic of forest monitoring and share some of my perspectives, some of what I do in my forest land, and kind of a few different levels of forest monitoring that you can consider. Nothing very complicated in this at all. Hopefully more so what this will do is get some ideas churning in you. Hopefully also enable you to go out and begin a little more systematic forest monitoring. But basically what I've done is broken, excuse me, the topic of forest monitoring, or the approach, I should say, to forest monitoring into three categories, and for lack of a better way of referencing them, basic, intermediate, and advanced. So I can attest that in my own management of my family's forest land, I am very inconsistent with anything that I would consider to be monitoring. And what I do probably spans, all three of these categories, if you will, of forest monitoring. So let's start with a very, very basic approach to forest monitoring. And I think a very basic approach is probably what most of us are already doing, that on somewhat of a regular basis, you go for a walk or you go for a drive through your forest and you just make observations. I think that is the most fundamental aspect of forest monitoring, is going out and with an open mind, objective mind, just observing your forest and observing change within your forest. Some of what you might be observing are signs of wildlife. If you're familiar with bird species, how are bird species changing throughout the seasons? Are you finding animal trails in your forest or signs of browse? Other types of observations, what types of mushrooms are popping up throughout different times of the year? When are plants breaking bud in the spring? When are they beginning to flower? When are they producing berries or nuts, if they're berry or nut producing trees and shrubs? All of this to me constitutes a very basic approach to forest monitoring. Whether or not you're actually writing these observations down or just lodging them away somewhere in your head, that's all forest monitoring. Another aspect of this basic forest monitoring is looking for forest management or maintenance issues in your forest. Observing invasive species, is that sacred patch of Himalayan blackberry that you've kept in the corner, is being well behaved, or is it beginning to spread? Are you noticing other invasive species? For instance, English holly is beginning to pop up all over my family's forest lands now. I've just noticed in the past, probably 5 years in particular, that it's becoming much, much more common. It's a forest monitoring observation. As we pass through these different winter storm events, are the storms exacting any kind of change to our forest? Are trees getting broken off? Are they getting blown over? Are trees falling across our access roads? Looking for forest health issues, whether or not you can identify specific forest health issues. There could be some basic uninformed observations. Are trees suddenly dying? One of our topics tonight that Joey will talk about is the decline in western red cedar, as well as some issues that big leaf maple are encountering. You've probably observed some of these forest health issues within your own forest. Do seedlings need some help? Seedlings that you've planted, are they getting encroached upon by competing vegetation? Are deer browsing them? If you cage them with tree cages, do those cages need to be lifted up to protect the trees, or the cages need to be straightened because they fell over or got clobbered by branches coming off during storm events? Forest roads, monitoring your forest roads. Are they draining stormwater properly? Do you see signs of surface erosion? Is that surface erosion contributing sediment to surface water, streams, wetlands, what have you? If you have any stream crossings on your property, are the stream crossings properly passing stormwater? If you have fish-bearing streams, does it appear that fish are able to pass through those stream crossings? And then lastly, although of course not in any way by least, observations of competition within your forest, trees that are competing with each other, maybe a sign that you need to be thinning your forest to reduce competition. So again, these are all, I put all these under the basic category of forest monitoring that, as you're walking around, as you're driving around, these are just some of the observations that you may be making. Of course, I would be encouraging you to be writing some of these observations down so you can keep track of them. If you're anything like me, once you get to about your 10th observation, you forgot the first two already. So, obviously handy to maintain a notebook as a good chronology of what you're observing throughout the years out there, which then takes us to the next level of forest monitoring. Again, for lack of a better term, I'll just call it intermediate. And this is where we're now going to begin a little more systematically documenting our observations. So one tool that I use that I'd encourage you to consider, since everybody these days has a smartphone, is there's any number of apps that you can put on your phone that allow you to track yourself as you walk somewhere. I use a couple different hiking apps, for instance, and you can record your track. So as you walk anywhere, let's say through your own forest, another forest, you can keep a track of where you're walking, and then you can create what are called waypoints. It's a way of recording a specific location, and attached to that waypoint, you can add notes. So let's say I've come across a patch of dead trees in my forest that I didn't notice before. On my mapping app on my phone, I can put in a waypoint and I can write down dead trees. I can take a photo of those dead trees and attach it to that waypoint. Now, when I get back to my office, I can download that track, those waypoints, those notes, those photos to Google Earth. And that's a place where I keep all of my observations. So every time that I go out in my forest and I do an observation walk and record these notes, record these photos, I go back, download it to Google Earth, put the date on there on that file of when I did that observation walk. And now over the course of many years, I have this chronology of observations that I've made, and I can go back at any point in time and open up that file, open up those waypoints, open up those photos, open up those notes, and see what was going on in the past. And so to me, it's a very easy way to document observations over time. Anything that I feel like I need to get access to a little more readily, I may still write down in a journal, a forest journal, forest notebook that I keep. Sometimes that's just a little more accessible than always having to open up a laptop and take a look at Google Earth. Another aspect of another category that I'd put into the intermediate level of monitoring is putting in temporary forest inventory plots. Now, this is getting a little more sophisticated, but NNRG on our website, and Alex will put some links in the chat function, has a guidebook that we developed a number of years ago on how to inventory and monitor small woodlands. I believe that's literally the title for it. And it will walk you through all the steps for how to put in inventory plots in your forest and record some very basic measurements: trees per acre, diameter at breast height, tree height, live crown ratio, height to diameter ratio. You may not be familiar with all these terms, but these are all elements of a basic forest inventory. A temporary plot is a plot that you just put in wherever you decide to put it in. So if there's a particular area of your forest that you want to record some specific metrics in, you just go to that area and using the guidelines in our guidebook, it'll show you how to put in a plot and collect these measurements that then are representative of that particular area of your forest. So that's something that I've done on a regular basis. And again, with my mapping apps, I can put in a waypoint that says, okay, this is my plot number 1, or this is my plot for the day. And in the notes function there, after I record trees per acre, I can say, okay, there were 240 trees per acre. The diameter ranges were 7 to 14, and the average diameter was 10 inches. Heights are averaging 57 feet. things like that. And again, that's a great snapshot in time of what's going on in that particular part of my forest. And then the last part that I would consider in the intermediate category is documenting management actions and when they need to occur. So you've made these observations, you see that maybe there's some disease happening, some trees have fallen down, maybe there's a high degree of competition in a particular forest. So now you're going to be writing down, okay, there's a need to thin this particular area of my forest where there is a high degree of competition. I'm observing some surface erosion on my road in this particular reach of the road or stretch of the road. You map out that in your mapping app and make a note that you need to come back during better weather, grade that out or whatever the maintenance treatment is. Maybe there's an area of your forest that is understocked or an area where invasive species are getting a little more under control, and you'll now record where that area is and what you need to do in that particular area. So again, those are all parts of aspects of intermediate monitoring. So let's step it up now to advanced monitoring. And this is really where you will benefit from taking a look at getting yourself familiar with this how to inventory and monitor small woodlands guidebook that we've created. Because the advanced monitoring now, from my standpoint, is about having a systematic grid of inventory and monitoring plots across your forest land. My family, again, owns 3 tracts of forest land. On our homestead property, we've had the longest in Oakville. I put in some permanent inventory plots probably about 10 years ago. I'm not sure if I can still find all of them, but I see a couple of them every now and again out there. I've monumented them with a piece of rebar and a white PVC pipe, so they're usually easy to see in the forest. On our land near Bakota, over the past few years, we've put in about 20 acres of permanent inventory plots as well, and collected basic inventory information. On our land up in Black Diamond, we have temporary plots up there. It means that the locations are not permanently marked, but we have inventory data that goes back 10 years there as well. And this is all systematically collected inventory data, so all done in the same manner, collecting diameters of all the trees within the plots, all the heights of the trees, recording the species, recording the live crown ratio, and having all of that information documented. And the idea is that you return to those permanent inventory plots on some kind of regularity. Some people return every 5 years, some people return every 10 years. It's really kind of up to you to decide, how often you feel it's necessary to come back, based on the amount of change in your forest. You may visit these plots pre-activities, say just before you conduct a timber harvest. Come back after the timber harvest, revisit those plots and measure so you've got a good handle on the before and after effects within your forest. So those are the aspects, I think, of advanced monitoring. It's just a much more systematic approach. So that's what I have, just to kind of give you some food for thought about 3 different levels of forest monitoring. I'm going to leave it at that for right now and turn it over to Joey. And again, we've invited Joey to join us because there's quite a number of different initiatives that I've come across over the years out there that I put under the category of citizen-based science. So these are opportunities for you as small woodland owners to participate in kind of a region-wide data collection processes. And Joey is running a program like that relating to Cedar and partially big leaf maple. And I want to have him introduce that and let you know how you can participate. So again, thank you, Joey, for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kirk. Yes, and thank you, Alex, for helping me through this. And thanks everyone for sharing some of your time this evening. I'm really grateful to be here with you all and appreciate the opportunity. I'm Joey Hulbert. I'm a postdoc at WSU based in Puyallup, but I live in Tacoma. And I studied natural resources at WSU in 2010, went to Oregon State for a while, traveled abroad and studied plant diseases while I was in South Africa doing a PhD, and I returned to WSU in 2020. And so I've been based here in the Northwest for a few years studying tree health issues. And so tonight we're going to talk a little bit about monitoring tree health, and we use a tool called iNaturalist to monitor some of these tree health issues. So I'm going to talk about how community members like yourselves have been advancing knowledge, and together we've been learning about the dieback of Western red cedar. Have any of you seen an unhealthy red cedar? Have you seen it on your property? I encourage you to type in the chat if you've noticed anything like that, and I'll show some photos, and so maybe that will stimulate some. But yeah, I already see Elliot has commented, oh yes. So some people are very aware. All right, so we're going to talk a bit about the dieback, some of the research that's going on, and then how you can help and why your help is particularly useful. I do want to acknowledge that I'm really, really fortunate and feel really privileged to be coming to you tonight from the traditional homelands of the Puyallup tribe. I do a lot of learning and researching and studying and discovering on these ancestral lands. And I just really am grateful that we get to live and explore and learn in this such a beautiful area, and appreciate that it's been stewarded since time immemorial for thousands of years by Native Americans. We're really grateful to be continuing on that stewardship. So something that I really learned to appreciate and appreciate where I am is through learning from red cedar, and I'm excited to be able to share that with you. So tonight, a lot of what I'll talk about is focused on red cedar. We know it's a really important species because it has such a robust distribution in the Northwest. It has a large footprint on our landscape. So if something's going on with red cedar, it's going to affect a lot of our forest lands. We know red cedar is really important because of its cultural role, its cultural values. We know red cedar was used for textiles and baskets and clothing and shelter, as well as transportation, and a number of other medicinal uses, as well as spiritual uses. It was really well used for or appreciated because of its ability to split really easily. And so plank houses were some of the first shelters built with Western red cedar. It's also a great carving wood, so you see a lot of totems created from carving. So clearly, Western red cedar has had a really rich history in the Northwest in terms of how peoples have interacted and benefited from it. It's considered a really generous species because of all the gifts that it's provided to indigenous peoples since they were here in the Northwest. It's also a really important part of our culture, or like our industrial heritage in the Northwest. And so many of the cities that we live in maybe were formed as mill towns, and during the booming forestry days when the Northwest was really timber capital of the world, and red cedar was an important part of that timber market, and still is today. And this is largely, again, because it splits so easily, also because it's really durable and doesn't decay. And I'm sure a lot of you are very aware of this, but I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk about how significant red cedar is and why it's really important that we understand what's going on with the health of red cedar. It's also really critical for habitat. So if you're managing for objectives, providing habitat or diversity in your forest, it's really important component in a lot of our west side forests, especially for things like, for species like salmon. It's a really water-loving species, often found near streams, next to streams, where it's providing shade and other services to these streams for the benefit of our salmon. And here in Tacoma, we gather around red cedar a lot. It's a enormous component of our urban forest and a really, really important species when we talk about the services and the benefits we're receiving from this species in our urban forest. So I've spent a lot of time learning from this tree, and it's really taught me some core principles about appreciating the Northwest and our heritage in the Northwest. But unfortunately, we have been seeing a lot of dieback. And so we characterize dieback as on the west side, we see trees very often with dead tops. Sometimes you'll see a tree that's completely brown or halfway brown. On the east side, it's more characteristic to see a tree that's yellow, like chlorotic, or you might just see a tree that's very thin and the canopy is really easy to see through. And together, all of those kind of symptoms are what we're considering as dieback. And so have you all seen stuff like this on trees in your property and trees? I think if you're on the west side, like a lot of us, it's hard to take a drive down the road without seeing trees like this these days. And it's pretty upsetting when you think about how important this tree is to the heritage and to the cultures and the indigenous peoples of the Northwest. Are we losing this species? Will other people have this opportunity to learn from this tree like I have in the future? It's kind of unclear. There is some research that's pretty much hot off the press. This is a project that's led by some colleagues at WSU where they've cored into trees, healthy and unhealthy trees, and they're looking at the relationship with climate and tree ring growth. So this study is in peer review right now, but because there's so much interest, they've shared it on this BioRxiv website. So there will be a blog post from NNRG. Let's see, I don't think Alex has posted it yet, but coming out tomorrow's newsletter, there's an article, like a newsletter blog post that we created. It has the links to everything that I show you today. So don't feel like you need to write these down. But so there's growing evidence kind of linking this dieback to the longer and hotter summer droughts that our region has been feeling. And it's particularly linked to spring water availability. And so it's interesting to find that really that water that we're receiving in June and July is really critical for the persistence of red cedar. And every year, if our spring is shorter, we may see more and more dieback like this. And this is, again, really tragic when we think about the cultural importance. Some of our collaborators have said, think of this dieback as similar to, one of your dearest relatives being sick or to having your language disappear, right? So when you hear people making these comparisons, it's an issue we really need to work on together and try and understand as best we can. In addition to that, there's a lot of landowners that see this issue and are quickly changing our management and changing how and what species we're growing. And so again, this is maybe it's a smart decision to, if you're depending on your management objectives, of course, but my impression is we need to try a few more things before we completely give up on red cedar because it's so important regionally. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can help and how you can help accelerate our knowledge of the factors that are affecting red cedar and how we can also work together to understand how we can best keep red cedar in certain management objectives. So we created a project with support from our partners in state agencies, Oregon Department of Forestry and Washington DNR, as well as Forest Health and Protection. So Betsy is in Wenatchee, Melissa's in Northeast Washington, and Christine's in Salem, Oregon. And together with them, we made this project on iNaturalist. And so iNaturalist is a tool online that you can use to monitor. I'm hesitant to tell you it's a good monitoring tool for your property. It's a great monitoring tool for our research projects and for getting everyone to work together to share common interests and find patterns in the landscape. But it's really good for documenting biodiversity on your property, doing what often you might hear as like a bioblitz. It's used often for bioblitzes where we just want to see, what diversity is out there. You could track kind of seasonality and stuff like that, but it's not a great tool for like repeat measurements of the same area, if you will. And in that case, you might consider a different monitoring tool. Like if you're trying to track tree growth, this isn't built for that. But the way this generally works is you take a picture, and you could do this with your phone or just a camera. If you do it with your phone, you can do it all in one place because you can download the iNaturalist app. If you do it with your camera, then you just go back to your computer later and you add it to inaturalist.org. But generally, you take a picture of any organism, and then the community on the platform helps you identify what that organism is. And so in our case, we're using it to take pictures of healthy and unhealthy red cedars. And then you share it and we confirm, yeah, that's a red cedar, or no, that's an Alaskan yellow cedar or a Port Orford cedar. You know, the cedars, there's a few different cedar species or cedar-like species in the Northwest. But the way our project works is you actually would join the project, and then when you add an observation of a red cedar, you tag the project. And when you tag the project, it asks some other questions like, is the tree healthy? Is the tree, you know, in the middle of a forest, or is it next to a road? You know, kind of getting some questions at the site characteristics. But what's neat is now we can look at where we're seeing healthy trees and where we're seeing unhealthy trees. And I encourage you to visit our dashboards, if you will, just some areas where you can click around and look at different tree categories, and that's foresthealth.org/analyses. But today we're sitting at almost 2,000 observations from more than 260 people like yourselves have contributed to this effort to understand where trees are healthy and where they're not. And we have a guide available on our webpage. It's a step-by-step how to use iNaturalist and how to answer every question on the project. And so again, you can find that on our webpage, foresthealth.org/map. But the reason that this is really useful is, you know, one, we're getting a good understanding of the distribution of where trees are healthy and where they're not. But two, we're also can start looking at the GPS points and the patterns behind those GPS points. So every single point that's added is essentially a point in our system, and we can pull in a lot of other data. We're really privileged in the Northwest because there's a lot of other open data that you can pull in once you have a GPS point. So every single tree that gets added on here, we can pull back 150 years worth of climate data, and we can look at where exactly it is on the landscape. Is it on a slope? Is it west facing? Is it in the middle of a ravine? Those kind of, you can pull all of that data just from a GPS point these days. We can also look at the soil. So we're starting to look at what happens when you throw all this data together with where trees are healthy and unhealthy. Is there certain data that is the best at explaining where trees are healthy? Or is there certain data that's the best at explaining where trees are unhealthy? And so that's kind of where we're at this stage. We're exploring, you know, how important is soils and determining whether your tree is going to be healthy or not. How important is your spring temperature? How important is whether it's on a slope or other things like that? And I can go into kind of the ways that we use computers and models to figure all that information out. But essentially, just believe me when I say we just throw a bunch of data at a computer and it tells us what's the best at explaining if a tree is healthy or unhealthy. And so I really encourage you, wherever you're going, if you have the time to take a photo and then answer a couple questions about that tree, it's really, really helpful for us to really pick out what predictors are important. So this is an example of when we throw in 1,000 of the points that people have added, you start to see these different classes emerge. So this is where all the unhealthy trees are, and here's where all the healthy trees are. And so we can start to look at which parameters, which environmental characteristics explain that difference. And right now we're seeing that soils is a really important part. And then after that, it turns out to be spring kind of moisture, like that other study that I mentioned is demonstrating. And so once we have kind of these understanding of which predictors are important, we can really start to build maps and start to predict and understand where red cedar is going to be healthy and where it's going to be unhealthy in the future. And so that's kind of the ultimate goal of this community effort, is just try and figure out where is it going to be good habitat for red cedar in the future, and where is it going to be unhealthy. So to summarize our efforts, one, we want to figure out, is precipitation more important or is temperature more important? Which predictors are the best at explaining where the trees are healthy and unhealthy? Then we want to make these maps. We want to figure out where trees are going to be vulnerable in the future so we can make decisions about where we should plant red cedar and where we are not. Once we are at this point, we can also start exploring, solutions. So if we know red cedar is going to be unhealthy in this point on our property, maybe we can explore red cedar from a southern province. We can look at what happens when you plant a red cedar from an Oregon population in a Washington environment, those kind of questions. So there's a lot we can still do with red cedar. We just need the funding and the effort and the time and the coordination with you all to really get there. So there's a few other things that are really important. Although we know, or although there's growing evidence that the dieback is linked to longer and hotter droughts, often we'll see a healthy tree right next to an unhealthy tree. You'll see a tree that's almost completely dead next to a tree that looks completely fine. So even within our own properties, there's a lot of variation between the health of our trees. And we really want to try and figure out why that is. If we expect that it's drought, why are not all the trees affected? We're also seeing some weird things where sometimes it seems like the red cedar next to the water source are the ones that are unhealthy, whereas the red cedars up on the slope are actually doing just fine. So there's some more kind of, it's more complex than just simply drought in a lot of cases, and we need to really understand what that is. And so there's a couple other projects we have going. This is we have this project called the Open Red Cedar Adaptation Network, and this is it's a small study where we've planted in 3 different parks. So it's kind of in an urban forest, but they're in parks. But we've planted red cedar from Oregon and from Washington in rows next to each other with the interest to explore, is there enough variation within red cedar that we could start to adapt our populations or our landscapes to sustain red cedar, but through assisted seed migration. Another thing we're doing is we're looking at the microbes in the soils and looking for root diseases, but also beneficial microbes. And so we've been collecting soils under cedar, and this is another way that you can get involved. We would welcome you to send us some soils from trees that are healthy or trees that are unhealthy. We're interested in both. And so in the post that Alex shared previously, there's links to some instructions about this, but we've also organized a few community hikes where we'll go out with a group like the Issaquah Alps Trail Club, and we'll collect soils together in kind of a certain area. And so in Puyallup, we will process those soils, and we're looking for a group called Phytophthora. And so this is just some examples of what kind of the backside looks like. And I'm happy to go into this, but I don't want to take up all of our time diving into the nitty-gritty stuff. But I do want to share this resource. So if you're interested in collecting some soils and sending them to us, we've prepared a guide pretty much just for you all. I made it the other week, this weekend, kind of providing instructions on how to collect soils and how to sterilize your shovel in between samples and where to send them if you're interested. And so again, that information, foresthealth.org/soil. And we'd really appreciate having a broader collection of soils. And it's really preliminary because we haven't, we're still just trying to see if there's any differences, if there's anything weird out in the soils. The final way that I'm going to mention, another opportunity you can get involved is a different issue. We're looking at a disease on maples now called sooty bark disease. And so I just wanted to share a couple of photos in case you see this on your property. Know that we're also using iNaturalist to kind of document where we're seeing this. And so there's been a few news articles. If you type in sooty bark disease, you'll find some information. But essentially, it's a fungus that's affecting our maples. We think it's been here for a really long time, but it seems to be becoming an issue now because the environment is changing. So we've had our maples together. We've had maples for a long time. We've had this fungus for a long time, but we're only now starting to really see this disease emerge because of we think because the trees are stressed, and two, because the fungus grows faster in warmer temperatures. And so this is some pictures of this disease. The bark, you'll see the bark has kind of flaked off, and underneath is this black fungus crust. It kind of looks like the tree is burnt. And so if you see this and you want to shoot me an email, you're welcome to email me or add it on iNaturalist. We really appreciate it. But I hope that was that okay? I hope we didn't run out of time. And I wish that I could spend more time sharing more information about this, but I don't also want, out of respect for everyone's time, it's late, it's 8:15, and
No, thanks,
please
Jay.
feel
I
free
guess
to follow up.
One thing that I'd ask just as a follow-up to that is, other than your website here, which I know is rich with information for folks, will there be other presentations on the work that you're doing or on this topic that you know of in the near future that folks could check in with if they wanted to learn more?
That's a really good question. Now it's kind of a weird time for me personally because I'm about to go on parental leave. We're expecting the arrival of a daughter within the next week. So my regular schedule is a little interrupted, but we do have research updates every month as part of the Forest Health. Thank you, Elliot. As part of the Forest Health Watch. I just haven't scheduled them out for this year yet. But keep an eye on the events calendar for the Forest Health Watch. Otherwise, would be thrilled to organize another presentation with you all anytime. We were doing bi-monthly sooty bark disease updates. We'll probably start that again starting in March. So all this stuff will just start again in March.
Okay, great.
I'm sorry, Kirk, but I'm not
definitely.
Yeah.
No, it's okay. I'm definitely motivated to download the iNaturalist app. I'm embarrassed to admit that I have not yet, given that I work all over Western Washington. I'll see if I can double the number of your
yeah, I know.
here.
It would be incredible to get to 3,000 observations this year. The more observations, the better the resolution, the more fine scale questions you can answer and ask. Happy to discuss some of the hypotheses we have for some of those kind of head scratching things I discussed, like why things are dying next to rivers versus upslope and stuff like that. But those are just some patterns that are kind of showing up in the data and making us think a little harder about what's going on.
Well, let's see. I know that there have been some questions put into the chat. So I think, Alex, have you been taking a look at those? If there are, anything that's specific to Joey's presentation, first, let's take a look at those. I did see a few come through when I was talking about very basic monitoring. So we can take those second.
Yeah, I think when you were talking about healthy trees being right next to diseased trees, Joan suggested perhaps that's due to genetic differences, or some are diseased already. Maybe you could elaborate.
Yeah, I think those are both good hypotheses. We don't really have a great understanding of how much variation in genetics. Red cedar is considered to be a lot less diverse than, say, like a Douglas fir in terms of genetic diversity, but I think still within a scale local scale, there's still some differences depending on your parents. And, certainly there's some reason that that has such a big range, right? Like there's got to be some differences genetically, depending on where it's adapted. But yeah, the root disease project, or the disease, is a good hypothesis. We know it's susceptible to armillaria. It's always been considered pretty tolerant compared to, say, like the Douglas fir or some of our hemlocks. But maybe now with longer and hotter summers, the more water stressed you become, the more you need every single little root you have. And so that one tree may have more root disease than the tree next to it. 20% of its roots may be infected versus 10%, right? I saw a talk from Dan Amdahl recently, who's the state forest pathologist for Washington State, one of them. He's incredible. Would be a really great person to include on one of these someday. He's more knowledgeable than me about diseases and insects in Washington. But he said that he thinks every single tree has root disease. It's just a matter of whether it's 1% or 100%, right? And so I think that's really important to consider. But we have a pretty limited understanding of what diseases are affecting our trees. Like no one has looked for Phytophthora on red cedar. And it doesn't seem like it is an issue from our preliminary stuff, but that's why we're collecting soils, just to kind of rule it out, see if there is something that comes up more often than others. Great question.
I think that was the only question in the chat related specifically to Joey's presentation. If people want to jump in, you're welcome to.
Yeah, and everyone's welcome to follow up with me specifically, or through Alex or Kirk. They can certainly loop us together, but if it's okay, I can share my email. And yeah, Alex has prepared a nice newsletter article for tomorrow's newsletter that has a lot of the links that I shared in our presentation. So you're welcome to reach out to us that way. I did just share a diagnostic guide for the sooty bark disease that we published at WSU Extension. Just has more pictures and explains a little more on what to look for if you're concerned about that maple disease. And I should note that we've seen it on a few other species. So it affects like dogwood, Pacific dogwood, a few others. So let's see. I mean, a lot of the different maples, but certainly big leaf maple, but even like Japanese maple gets affected. But we found it on some cherries and European beech, as well as horse chestnut. So we don't really have a good understanding of all the trees it can affect. So if you see anything where the bark is flaking off and there's a fungus underneath, we'd love to get a sample from you, or at least see some pictures. Yeah.
Alex, were there any other questions? Otherwise, I'd be happy to open it up to more of a general discussion amongst folks.
There was a question for you, Kirk, about holly in your forest from earlier. Why you mind the holly?
What was the question?
Oh, what you mentioned that you were noticing more holly in your forest, and I mean it's an invasive species, so I imagine that's why you were concerned about it.
Oh, okay. Why was I concerned? Yeah. Non-native species that not just in my own forest, been working all over Western Washington. I'm seeing it pop up with dramatic frequency. My main concern about it, beyond it just being not native, is that it's extremely shade tolerant. And not to sound too alarmist, but to sound alarmist, I've begun referring to English holly as the next Himalayan blackberry, because it's so shade tolerant, and because it resprouts from its roots, and birds continue to spread it. I expect that if it's not kept in check, that it will become very dominant in the understory of forests and very competitive then, with other native shrubs, native trees that are trying to regenerate in the understory. So if you're observing English holly in your forest, I highly recommend that you develop a program to control it. I mean, to eradicate it. If it's small, you can pull it. If it's larger, you have to cut it. And this is where I definitely would recommend a judicious application of herbicide on the cut stem. It's very difficult to pull or remove when it gets very big, so you do need to cut it and use herbicide. But anyway, that's my concern about holly. So if that was it for questions, I guess what I'd like to do, just for the few minutes that we have left, and try to make this a little more interactive, is I'm curious to hear from you folks, what kind of forest monitoring you do. What is your forest monitoring program, however you define that. And I've already admitted that mine is very erratic, not particularly formalized, not very systematic, but there are some key things that I do, in taking photos and documenting notes in Google Earth and what have you. But what do you folks do? Yeah, Joan rather, Hendricks. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah. Well, we have 120 acres and our house is on it. So we're retired now. So we pretty much walk a lot of our roads and trails, different ones every day, and just do, like you're saying, the just noticing things. One thing we do a lot of is any Scotch broom that's out there, we pull it up right away.
Blackberries.
And blackberries, yeah. Yeah, and just noticing what's going on. So kind of informal, like you're saying.
Yeah.
But we're out there pretty much every day.
Yeah, fantastic.
I'll mute myself again.
Does anybody else have anything similar, or any? I'm of course very curious if anybody's doing anything more systematic, systems for recording observations, recording photos, keeping a journal, anything like that.
Well, I'll admit that my recording ran to dates and lists of wildlife, of two-legged and four-legged, but I'd like to do something better. I'm intrigued with you're using a hiking app to get data into Google Earth for a long-term record. Could you tell us what app you're using to begin with?
Yeah, there's a couple. The one that I've used for years, and I have an Android, so I don't know if this is available for iPhone, but it's called Backcountry Navigator. And to be honest, there are dozens of hiking apps out there that I think probably perform all of the same kind of basic functions. The one thing that I like about Backcountry is you can download a number of different maps, an aerial photo, a topo map. I think there may be a hillshade map that shows the real kind of minute topographical differences on the land. And you can load those like ahead of time. And so if you're out in your woods and you don't have data, you already have that map on your phone. And for those of you that don't know this, even if you don't have data, the GPS on your phone will still work. So you don't need to be within cell range for the GPS on your phone to work. So if you have this hiking app or any relevant hiking app in a pre-downloaded map, you can go out in your woods, use the GPS again to record your track as you walk along, and then put in those waypoints, at points of interest along the way. And then the file format that Google Earth uses is either KML or KMZ. And most hiking apps are designed to download the data that you record as either a KML or a KMZ file. And that's how you can open it up then in Google Earth and then look at the aerial photo in Google Earth and have the, again, the photos that you've taken pop up right there, your notes. Joan just mentioned OnX Hunt. Also, I've been hearing a lot about that app. One of the great things about that app is it has property ownership information on there. So if you do happen to be out, away from your land, hiking through the woods or driving by property, it'll show you parcel boundaries as well as who the owner of that parcel is. And that's always a question I have. I either drive by some beautiful forest or some really degraded forest. And it's usually the latter that I want to know who the landowner is so I can reach out and say, hey, can I help you? So OnX is a good app for that. Let's see. Yeah, anyway, there's any number of them. EarthMate is another one. Guru Maps is another one that I have. Since we're on the topic of apps and monitoring, for folks that are interested in learning the bird species on their land, the Cornell Ornithology Laboratory has an app called Merlin. And I found it to be amazingly accurate. You can, if you hear a bird call, you can hold it up and hit the record button, and it will listen to all of the birds in your area and tell you what the bird species is. So that's something that I've added to my monitoring program now, is writing down the birds that are on my land. And that's been a great way to get just more intimately familiar with the wildlife on my property. Anybody else? I don't mind lingering for just a couple more minutes. Anybody else have a great monitoring tip that they care to share? Pro tip for the rest of us, or an amateur tip, however you want to qualify yourself. Y'all are too shy.
I will just say I downloaded the iNaturalist app today, and there was a neat feature that shows you a map of where you are, and it shows you observations that other people have made about various things, and you can click on each observation and see the photo that they uploaded of a plant or an animal. It was pretty cool to see what people in my neighborhood have done, like in the block next door. A lot of spiders apparently. But yeah, so lots of good reasons to download that app.
Oh, Richard, you're still, even though you unmuted, we can't hear you. Something's not working to pick up your voice. Hand signals? You have to save that thought for next month, unless you put it in the chat. All right. Well, unless somebody else has a juicy tidbit that they care to share with us, it's 8:31, and out of respect for everybody's time, we do try to keep these to an hour. I thank you for joining us. I hope this was edifying, if not at least entertaining for you all. Join us again next month. I don't know what the topic's going to be. Alex, have we settled on a topic for February, or are we going to keep people in suspense for a little while?
We might keep them in suspense. We have a tentative topic.
All right, that sounds good. Okay, well, again, this also has been recorded and will show up on our NNRG's YouTube channel within probably a few days or so. In the meantime, again, welcome you to follow up with Joey. Joey, thank you so much for joining us and for what you're doing out there. And I encourage folks to download the iNaturalist and participate in this citizen-based monitoring program. Just brilliant stuff. So thank you for joining us. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening, and look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.